Okay, that's very good. Okay, what is our... Oh, hang on a second. Anyone seen the drinks trolley?
No. Oh, there it is.
Oh, there it is.
The David Jenkins Memorial Drinks Trolley. What are you selecting for us from there?
Well, I thought we could have a nice Austrian white today. So a Grüne Veltliner is very, very tasty. So why not a very large glass of that for a Monday?
Okay, well, that seems... I've got no idea what that tastes like, but I'm sure it'll be sweet.
It's a bit like a Riesling. No, it's not. It's not that sweet. Quite dry.
I'll take that as your top tip. Thank you. Today's confession comes from Nigel. You should not indulge in any of the things that Nigel gets up to.
Good.
Oh, dear.
So, this is my confession from some 51 years ago. Sadly, and inevitably, a few of the main people involved have passed. But not because of the confession. just
Good. Good to know.
Traditional aging process.
Yeah.
Just aging.
Yeah. From 1971, I was sent to a private school in the south of the UK. Let's call it St Custard's, as we normally do.
Yeah.
My best friend, Peason, and myself loved this school as we both appeared to have very different needs from most of the other students. It turns out I have dyslexia, and this meant poor learning abilities in reading and writing. Peason was similar, hence the friendship. Peason and I were often asked to leave classes like maths, English, German, and definitely French, but excelled in copperwork, woodwork, bookbinding, and canoe building.
Wow.
This is the stuff.
Canoe building.
I want to have a canoe building lesson.
Amazing.
Bookbinding. Anyway, I made it through most of my school years with some minor upsets. That is until they phoned my father and explained he was wasting his money. Peason and I, plus a small group of others who had also, in quotes, misbehaved in class, were often sent to the science lab for exclusion class. Different times.
Yeah.
These classes were run by a long-suffering but very tolerant teacher called Mr. Arbuthnot. Inevitably.
Again.
In these lessons, we were asked what would we like to study? What would we like to learn about? Well, Peason and I suggested the internal combustion engine. So we took a Lambretta engine apart and then put it back together again. For testing it, we got 4 Saturday detentions, as apparently riding it through school was not a good plan. So anyway, having done that and had the scooter removed, we asked, could we learn about gunpowder?
Oh, no.
This is where it all sort of goes wrong. Mr. Arbuthnot happily continued to teach us in the history from the monks who discovered it and how they made it. Then we followed its early use in fireworks to its use in weapons.
Yeah.
The later lessons were held in the chemistry lab, and trying to make the gunpowder is not easy.
Good. Hope so too.
We were allowed to take home small amounts of the 3 ingredients and experiment with different mixes, but this had to be done with our parents' permission and in attendance.
Oh, right. Well,
Of
that's
course.
okay.
Written reports on what was done had to be handed in weekly. Much to Peason's horror, my father and I were quite good at this and got excellent results. At this point, I should say the small pile of chemicals was never larger than 1/4 of a teaspoon. Okay, I think I'm a bit reassured. When lit, this gave a very bright flash and a huge puff of smoke, just like in all those chemistry sets you could buy at the time. Peason got quite obsessed with it, and on my final day at school, he excitedly told me that he'd got the blend just right. He was going to show me at lunchtime, or maybe during our English O-level. Yes, that's...
What?
Yes. We all filed into the classroom, and Mr. Grimes, the head teacher, settled us down and walked around checking what was on the desks. Peason sat to my right in the front row of the classroom. He pulled the corner of a plastic bag through a hole in the bottom of the desk, and he dared me to light it. This is very different to my English O-level.
My goodness.
The exam started and all was quiet except for Mr. Grimes, some 6.5 feet tall, striding up and down the row. I did what I could of the exam, but as usual couldn't do a lot. So having exchanged eye contact with Peason several times and watched him tug the corner of the bag, decided the dare was on. How big was this small bag poking through the desk, and how big would the puff of smoke be? Well, with heart racing and Mr. Grimes walking towards the back of the room, now was the time. My heart was racing as I moved my lighter...
Lighter?
What do you do with the lighter? As I moved my lighter under Peason's desk. Well, Peason had perfected his blend, as it turned out, and there was a very large bang, and the lid of his desk blew off. Peason and his chair flew backwards and a huge puff of smoke filled the entire room. Grimes rushed to Peason and whilst leaning over him, lying prostrate on the floor, shouted, "You horrible little man, get out!" At different times. At this point, I called across. Genuinely, I said, "Please, sir, it wasn't him, it was me." I was marched to the head's office and got to start college a year earlier than I should. And my father never asked about the desk, but he got to save some money. That was the end of my education. I am not seeking forgiveness from Peason as he continued to get into trouble with me, but from my classmates whose exam I spoilt. And I don't believe ever knew who the culprit was due to us both being ushered out with the fire alarm ringing in their ears. I'd like to say sorry to all the teaching staff who in actual fact did succeed in turning out a good, well-skilled student, even if it wasn't the skill that they were actually paid to teach. Well, as I said, a story from 1971 where that kind of thing was perfectly fine, apparently.
Yeah.
Sister Susie from the pub.
Well, Nigel, I just don't think I can forgive you. You shouldn't have done any of that. It sounds very, very dangerous. And yeah, think of all those people taking their exams. And also, it's a private school, so all those people's parents have paid for them to be there, and all that money potentially wasted if you ruined it. So no forgiveness from me.
A gunpowder explosion in an English O-level.
Yeah.
Brother from another
Well,
guy.
I mean, you've got to, I suppose you have to admire this school for coming up with canoe building and take the gunpowder home and try it with your mum and dad. See what happens. I'm going to forgive just because that's an innovative way of educating the next generation and an encouraging initiative, isn't it? Because you won't do that again, will you? You won't light gunpowder on your table again.
Don't try this at home.
Definitely don't do
Don't
that.
try it.
And definitely forgiven.
61054 on the text. First word is Simon. Do you forgive? Yes or no? It's entirely down to you. We brought you a shocking confession from Nigel. It's another school chemistry-based confession. Even though he had been taught canoe building and bookbinding, our favourite new subjects. I go back to school actually if that was on
definitely.
offer. That'd be really good. Him and his mate Peason ended up learning about gunpowder with consequences which meant that their English O-level desk blew up.
Yeah.
With hilarious consequences. Don't try any of that at home, but this is the people's verdict.
So Christy says forgiven. Sitting an English exam sounds extremely boring. An explosion going off sounds hilarious. Good one, Nigel. Philip says, I agree with Matt. Definitely forgiven. Still laughing at the image, which brightened up a Monday afternoon at work. And finally, Martin, not my real name, says, I'd like to forgive Nigel. My friends and I did something similar whilst at boarding school in the late 70s. Only we made nitroglycerine, having acquired the necessary ingredients from the tech lab. We let it off in the school woods and ended up with holes in our clothes. Different times.
Well, very much so, different times. But those confessions are always very welcome. We can anonymise them, if that's a verb.
No, that is a word.
Okay, let's do that. So send in your confessions, and if we use it, you get a smart speaker. What a fine Christmas gift that would be. Confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. But let us know, Simon at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. There we go, live to the Saloon Bar where Sister Susie's producing the show, just checking everything's okay there.
Oh, 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. And the drinks trolley is coming round.
Oh, there it is. Yes.
David Jacobs Memorial
David
Drinks
Jacobs.
Trolley. What are we selecting today from our trolley?
Well, it's really dark and a bit miserable here, so I thought, how about a nice porter, which would be
Again.
very, very delicious.
Another porter.
Another porter.
I like it, but it's kind of like an autumnal drink, a winter
Yes.
drink.
What do you mean another porter?
We had porter last night, didn't we?
No, it was a
we-
wine last night. It
Oh,
was
was
a
it wine?
Berliner.
Oh,
Don't
that's
pay
true.
attention to me,
No,
do you?
no.
Today's confession comes from Not Another Nigel. That's how
Oh,
it's
good.
signed.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of Nigels sending in their stories. Dear Father Simon, Sister Susie, Brother Matthew, the Supreme Order of Forgiveness. My confession takes place in 1977. It's the year of Star Wars at the cinema,
Oh,
Shawaddy
yeah.
Waddy in the charts, multicoloured swap shop on the telly. I was 10 at the time and living in Bristol, so just round the corner from Sister Susie's pub. Although I didn't know anything about that at the time. My dad had arranged a weekend away for us to stay with an old friend of his from his youth. His friend was known as JJ. My dad hadn't seen him since the 50s, so this reunion was going to be a big moment for him. Now that Saturday morning, my dad, Mum and I set off in our Renault 6 along the M4 to Slough. We were still 20 miles out when the car broke down and we had to be towed the rest of the way on the back of a breakdown truck. We eventually pulled up outside JJ's 5-bedroom house and I couldn't help but noticing the shiny new Jaguar XJ6 sitting on their driveway. JJ was a partner in a top accountancy firm, apparently in London, and therefore not short of a bob or two. As our car was lowered from the back of the truck, JJ and Margot, his wife, came out to greet us. I didn't become successful as I am today by buying second-hand cars, JJ commented with a smug expression. My dad thought it best not to mention actually it was third-hand, but anyway. Never mind, we're heading over to my club for drinks. JJ insisted. My dad and I got into his Jaguar and we took off, leaving Mrs. JJ and my mum to prepare lunch. Different times.
Yes.
On the way there, we passed Pinewood Studios. JJ proudly pointed to where Sid James used to live and bragged that he'd once seen Roger Moore in the area.
In the area. Somewhere.
Yeah, just around.
When we reached the private members club, I was bought a lemonade. My dad was forced to smoke one of JJ's expensive cigars. I only smoke the finest cigars, he boasted. Then he turned to me. Hey, boy, he said. JJ was looking my direction. My son Cedric will be home from St. Custard's later today. I'm sure you'll both have a lot in common. He's top in everything and plays chess. Oh, I replied, I played chess. But JJ was having none of it. Yes, but Cedric has won several tournaments. He's the best player in the school and he never loses ever. That afternoon, I know, insufferable already, I was introduced to Cedric. He's a spotty, spindly 13-year-old. Obviously the apple of his father's eye, even though he dressed like he was an old city gent, aged 65. I think we all know the kind of boy you're talking about. Do you have a Rubik's Cube? He asked me.
Where on earth?
No, I replied. Oh, dearie dear. The patronising tone and sneer was quite infuriating. He went up to his room and came back with his Rubik's Cube. My father bought this for my birthday. It's father's belief that solving the cube on a regular basis will improve my brain's cognitive abilities. I have solved the puzzle 54 times. Cedric handed me the cube. You'll probably not solve it. It took me at least a week. Well, how hard could it be? I was thinking, surely it's just about matching up all the colours on each side of the cube. Can't be too difficult. Well, after a few hours of twisting and turning the layers on the cube, I was no nearer to solving it. I went to bed that night feeling a total failure. This was more than just solving a puzzle. This was about family honour. Well, the next morning after breakfast, I returned to the bedroom and continued turning each layer of the cube. After an hour, I was getting nowhere, and suddenly an idea struck me. I started peeling off the coloured stickers on some of the pieces and then restuck them back on so that each side had matching colours. I felt like a genius. I noticed a few of the stickers starting to unstick, however. Panic set in, and I couldn't help but think that if I could get them to stick, everyone will know. If I can't get them to stick, everyone will know I'm a fraud. I saw on the shelf a Pritt stick, although obviously other glues were available, but not at this particular time. I quickly grabbed it and stuck down the stickers. After a detailed inspection of the cube, it all looked fine to me. I went downstairs and announced in front of JJ and Cedric that I had solved the Rubik Cube in record time. JJ glared at Cedric. Cedric turned white with the shock. He'd been beaten by a state schoolboy several years younger than him. The humiliation. I looked at my dad. His face beamed with pride. We left the house with our heads held high and boarded the tow truck, taking our car to Bristol. Therefore, I need to ask forgiveness from Cedric, who had to live with the family humiliation for at least a few days, or whenever it was the stickers finally started to peel off, and he would discover that actually I was a cheat after all. Well, I don't think we've had a Rubik's Cube confession, so that's a very nice edit.
I thought so.
Yes, excellent.
Thank you from Not Another Nigel. Sister Susie from the pub, speaking first.
Oh, not another Nigel. Do you know what? I should say that technically that's cheating and that isn't allowed and I can't forgive you. However, you're from Bristol and I might have done that when I was younger as well because I couldn't solve the Rubik's Cube.
I think you did, didn't you?
I did do it, yeah. So I'm going to forgive you because I would have forgiven myself. So there you go.
Brother from another gutter.
Well, obviously I'm just going to forgive based on the voices because that truly was pushing back the boundaries yet again. I mean, listen, we've all done it. We've all tried to solve the Rubik's Cube by just taking the stickers off. Frankly, far more fun than actually solving the cube itself. But I am going to definitely forgive just because of the Reggie Perrin references. I didn't get where I am today.
Yes.
CJ and the rest of them, very good. Definitely forgiven.
I think it was like a Rees-Mogg voice I was going for.
Yes. Well, careful. Yeah. Okay. Let's get into the music.
It's just another voice. Just another voice. People's verdict. Do you forgive Not Another Nigel? Please on the text 61054. Start your message with Simon. 61054. Start your People's verdict with Simon, and the People's verdict is incoming. Today's confession was from Not Another Nigel, and a story about how he cheated at a Rubik's Cube to his very annoying new 13-year-old friend by peeling all the stickers off and just rearranging them so that it looked as though he'd won. People's verdict like this.
So Drick says, forgiven, I cannot abide people who think they're better than others. You did what all of us state school kids would have loved to do. Good on you. Andy in Wigan, from memory, if you took hold of the corner block on a Rubik's Cube and pulled hard, it would unsnap. Then you could easily dismantle it and rebuild it to its perfect state without even removing the stickers. I am guilty of carrying out this procedure many times to my advantage. And finally, Kevin G in Leeds says, what a great confession. I myself may have accidentally cheated the cube. Thanks for the great entertainment on your show. What a great team you all are.
Excellent. Well, I like the sound of his jib. The cut of his jib.
Cut of his jib, yeah.
So it might be that you have a confession, and if it's a good one, we'll use it, and then you get a smart speaker. It's not a bad deal. You send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. So it's 5:46. Let's check in the public. No, the saloon bar, of course, where Sister Susie is in charge.
Of course.
How are you scoring the show today?
10 out of 10.
Very good value.
Wow, that's good.
Good value for a 10 out of 10.
Big shot.
Okay, just checking whether the drinks trolley. There's the drinks trolley. I was wondering whether it was going to turn up.
Yes.
David Jacobs Memorial
Jacobs, yeah.
Drinks Trolley. What are you selecting from the trolley for us today?
Well, it's still quite rainy and miserable here today, so I thought a nice spiced rum.
Oh.
And either ginger or Coke, however you would like your mixer to be, but that'll be nice and warming.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. Today's confession comes from Trevor. Not Nigel.
Not Nigel. I was
Not
gonna say.
Nigel.
Father Simon, I want to seek forgiveness on behalf of my late father. I will take you back to the year of 1990. Age 19, I was on my final family holiday with my parents, and this year it had been decided to take the long drive from West Sussex all the way to the Spanish capital, Madrid. It would take us a week to get there, because getting there is half the fun after all. We set off one August morning in our lovely jet black Austin Montego saloon. Montego. Our Austin Montego saloon, I always got that wrong, with beige trim and state-of-the-art CD changer in the boot. I love those.
Wow.
They were great.
Wow.
Our journey took us across the channel to Saint Malo and then down the west coast of France. As was usual for our holidays, we hadn't booked any accommodation ahead, but we had previously stayed in a hotel chain called Hotel Campanile. They were quite distinctive with a green logo. Why are you laughing?
Right, okay, go on.
Hotel Campanile.
Yeah.
That's what it's called.
Yes, it is.
I haven't changed the name or anything.
Really?
They were quite distinctive. They had a green logo and tended to be located slightly out of town.
Yes.
So we often tried... You sound as though you know what you're
Yes, I
doing.
do, but go on.
Okay. Sound as though you might have a story. So we often tried to seek one of these out whenever we arrived in a new place. So we checked into one of these campaniles in a small town called La Baule, close to Saint-Nazaire, near the mouth of the Loire River. It was very hot. I haven't changed anything, as you can tell.
This is
been very
amazing.
specific.
Go on.
It was a very hot day. We quickly headed off to in the Montego to the beach with 2 room keys, numbers 12 and 13. From memory, it was about a 20-minute drive. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, we got back into the roasting hot Montego with plastic to roast your thighs. I remember those. Back to the hotel we went, and that's where the problem started. You see, we'd been a tad hasty in our desire to hit the beach, and we hadn't taken too much notice of the location of the hotel. We drove back via a one-way system, looped around a couple of times, and found ourselves back where we started. My dad wasn't blessed with a great deal of patience, and he started to get slightly agitated and flustered. Now, I had given up French at the first opportunity, and my parents' vocabulary was somewhat limited, to the extent where my mum could only say, "Sur le pont d'Avignon."
Very good.
After some obscure song she learnt at
Yes.
school. That's not an obscure song, that's a classic
It is.
15th century French.
The pont
"Sur le
d'Avignon.
pont d'Avignon. On y danse tout le rond." And so on. Anyway, that's all she would say. We drove around a bit more and then succumbed to finally asking for directions. It went a bit like this. My dad, avez-vous direction pour Hotel Campanile, s'il vous plaît? Our replies were either a shrug, a Gallic shrug, of course,
No.
or a series of gauches and droites, and that appeared very complicated. We tried again, but clearly we had lost our hotel. Then my dad formulated a new plan, and it started with the term right. He spotted a young French family enjoying a nice picnic in the evening sun in a park and pulled the car up alongside. He then told my mum to get into the back seat and left the passenger door open. Striding up to the family, he again asked for directions to the Hotel Campanile, but this time he asked for a bit more cooperation. He then pointed to the man, then to the passenger seat of our car and said, "Vous, ici." The man looked slightly puzzled and worried, but my dad reiterated, "Vous, ici." The man walked over to our car, looked at myself and my mum in the back, turned to my dad and said, "Moi ici." "Oui," said my dad, "Vous ici," pointing at the car. The man then called his wife and child over and they chatted away for a minute or so before packing up their picnic. Amazingly, the man agreed to get into our car.
What?
I wouldn't have done.
No.
And would direct us whilst his wife followed us in their vehicle. He took us away from the beach area and onto a dual carriageway. We then quickly realised we were going to head over the Saint-Nazaire Bridge, a large suspension bridge spanning the Loire. It was an opportunity for my mum to say, "Oh, I know this, sur le pont."
Davignon. Yeah.
Anyway, we, the man replied, "Sur le pont," looking ever more confused, like, what's that got to do with anything? Now, it did seem a bit strange that we were heading over this bridge, as we certainly had not arrived that way, but we exited off at the first junction, took a couple of turns, and then the man proclaimed, "Voilà, l'Hotel Campanile." We were indeed outside a Hotel Campanile.
Yeah.
The slight issue was that it wasn't ours. So we'd basically kidnapped a poor Frenchman to take us to the wrong hotel that we weren't staying at. To the man's dismay, we explained that this was not our hotel. He looked very perplexed, but then my dad produced one of the room keys. It had a large wooden key ring with the number 12 on it. And that was all. The man looked at the key, pondered, called out to his wife, who was wondering what the hell was going on, and got back into our car. "D'accord," he said, "on y va." It was now completely dark, but we set off again, back over the bridge.
Wow.
Sur le pont, says my mum.
Yes, of course.
Back through the town of La Baule, and finally to a hotel with a green sign outside that looked very familiar. He had found it, I don't know how, but somehow he'd recognised the wooden keyring. And after many mercies, we said our farewell to our Good Samaritan, and he would finally rejoin his family. But we need the forgiveness, please, for that French family, for spoiling their picnic, for kidnapping their dad, speaking terrible French, and reiterating, basically reiterating the French view that the English were all crazy. It's Trevor's tale, a strange tale, Hotel Campanile kidnapping. Sister Susie, the voice of authority.
Oh, well, Trevor, I do feel for you, but your dad clearly kidnapped someone. And, you know, it's never a good idea when someone who's already grumpy starts a sentence with right.
Correct.
You know that's never going to end well. And therefore, I can't forgive you because that poor family.
Brother from another gutter.
Qu'est-ce que c'est la fage? I am going to forgive just because of the vous ici and sur le pont. We are on the bridge. Thanks very much. Lovely. Yes, sur le pont d'Avignon. Definitely. I mean, it was a lovely day out for everyone involved, wasn't it? Even the French family, they enjoyed their time. That's what I took from that story. And so, yes, definitely forgiven. Frere Jacques, etc.
Exactly, yes. I like the idea of the father just demanding vous ici, like he's in charge.
Yeah.
Anyway, people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Trevor, yes or no? The people's verdict then on tonight's confession from Trevor. It was our Lost in France confession involving basically Trevor's dad kidnapping a French guy who was trying to help them get to the Hotel Campanile, and everybody loved each other in the end. The verdict is in like this.
And everyone's forgiving. Gemma says, travelling abroad's always so stressful. Languages, directions, it's a nightmare. Definitely forgiven. Forgiven, says Lindsay, as a painfully embarrassed adolescent studying GCSE French, I was made to vacate the have family car on holiday to ask directions. I used my best accent and thought I'd done an okay job when the other person replied in English. Love the show. And finally, Helen from Southampton, forgiven. Reminds me of our camping holiday when we got lost in a French town and in their one-way system with a trailer attached to our car. We were also looking for a hotel in which we'd stayed 2 weeks previously. While we didn't kidnap anyone, we did gate crash a wedding reception in order to ask for directions. The bride was brilliant and sent us on the right track, and I wished her bonne chance.
Excellent. Bonne chance indeed, n'est-ce pas? Voulez-vous couper mes tulipes, monsieur?
Mate,
Jacques Malchance n'a pas de chance. Anyway,
Frère Jacques.
your confession, maybe about being on holiday, maybe about being rubbish at languages, send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. And here we are, all gathered, assembled, and we're just checking on the drinks trolley. Has it made it through? Oh, it has made it through.
Yes, it has.
What are we selecting from our trolley today, Suze?
Well, I'm going back to one of my classics, which I've done many times, but you can never have enough. A gin and tonic.
Oh, why not?
Another gin and tonic.
Yes, please.
But I would say maybe a Sip Smith today. Have a Sip Smith gin.
I wouldn't know, but...
It's the one with the swan on the bottle.
That one, okay. A couple of those then. Thanks very much. Today's confession comes from Jerry. Jerry, thank you very much indeed for this. Father Simon, I was a schoolboy back in the late 70s at quite an old-fashioned grammar school. Porridge Court.
Oh, dear.
Thanks,
Go on. Yeah.
As a teenager in those days, there were from time to time various crazes that swept through the school, like conkers, for example. One of the crazes was for water pistols. However,
dear.
after a few weeks, the teachers had had enough of this nonsense, and water pistols were banned. However, we were not to be defeated, and we needed easily concealed devices for shooting water at each other. Also at prefects and other members of staff.
What?
Eventually, my friend Grabber came upon a small supply of plastic syringes. Small plastic syringes. These were perfect for concealment in a blazer pocket and surprisingly accurate. Their only drawback was that they could only contain a small amount of fluid at a time and needed many visits to the toilets to replenish at break. Obviously, the science labs with their sinks and taps were an ideal source of water. We were taught biology by Professor Grayson, a kindly man who did his best but sometimes failed to bring the subject to life, shall we say. Unfortunately, also, there is always someone who has to take everything a bit too far. Firing water at each other from our syringes whilst his back was turned was fine, but it was beginning to lose its excitement, so somebody had the bright idea of adding some colour to our fountain pen ink.
Good.
Okay, by adding fountain pen ink into our water weaponry. As previously mentioned, our school was rather old-fashioned, and we were required to write with fountain pens, which meant that we had to have ink and ink wells and ink bottles. One of the aforementioned crazes was for turquoise ink. Very trendy, very 70s. So two of us found ourselves armed with syringes full of turquoise ink and something of a target-rich environment. At the back of the biology lab was a large glass tank that contained hundreds of locusts that were used... I don't approve of any of the behaviour, by the way, in today's confession.
Oh, dear.
Contained hundreds of locusts that were used for study purposes and occasionally dissection. In order to keep the locusts alive, there was a large heated lamp in the tank, and from time to time the locusts would perch on the lamp, if indeed locusts perch. My main partner in crime, Grabber, nudged me and pointed at the locusts. Quickly sensing his plan, I checked that Professor G's back was turned and quietly slid the lid off the tank. How funny would it be to shoot ink at the locusts and turn them turquoise? We both discharged our syringes at the same time. And this is where things took an unexpected turn. As soon as the turquoise ink hit the heat lamp, it exploded with a loud bang.
Yeah, of course it did.
And dispersed ink all over the locusts. I quickly slid the lid back on as Mr. G and the whole class turned round in startled fashion to see what had caused this loud explosion. A rather anxious Professor G ran down the aisle to survey the scene of devastation. "What on earth happened here?" He inquired of the rather... What's wrong, Matt? With the rather guilty-looking pair on the back row.
Excellent.
"Don't know, sir. Just exploded, sir, didn't it?" We muttered, certain that we were going to get unmasked as the culprits. It was fairly obvious. "Most extraordinary," said Professor G. "I've never seen anything like it in my life." And with that, went back to the front of the class and continued the lesson as though absolutely nothing had happened. As though there weren't locusts strewn everywhere. Not just ordinary locusts, but turquoise locusts. It appeared as though we'd got away with it. The syringes were ditched after that, and never again did we fire turquoise or any other colour at schoolboys, teachers or insects. Simon and the crew, I'd like to confess to this heinous crime. I'd like to confess to Mr. Grayson, apologise for disrupting his lesson, colouring his locusts and misleading him. Mostly I'd like to apologise to the poor locusts who were inconvenienced by our mischievousness.
I bet they were.
I've rewritten that bit.
Oh, really?
I'd plead for forgiveness because, nice man that he was, Mr. G's lessons were a bit dull, and as restless teenagers, we did tend to egg each other on sometimes. I also plead some mitigation because Grabber was actually the ringleader who should have known better, as he later admitted to me. I've borne the guilt for over 40 years, but now would like to come clean. Yours contritely. That's from Jerry. So, Sister Susie, what do you say? I mean, we can't approve of this kind
No,
of thing,
Jerry, tut. Now, I do like your choice of ink, because I've got my fountain pen, and it is. It's green more, really, but, similar aquamarine turquoisey colour. So, yeah, I do approve of that. However, I don't approve what you did with the locust. I don't approve that you're squirting ink around. It's just, you're in school. You should be learning. Just sit there and do what you're told. Not forgiven.
Okay, thanks, head teacher. Brother from another gutter.
But isn't it also true that the point of these kind of chemistry lessons is to experiment and see what happens? I didn't know what was going to happen when ink hits a heat lamp. Turns out the heat lamp explodes.
Wow.
Also, you've got to ask questions about the teacher who couldn't work anything out, didn't realise that there were these locusts covered in ink. Doesn't have a very keen eye. Clearly, ink capable. So for that reason, I choose to forgive. Ink.
Are you
capable.
so pleased with yourself?
Ink
Okay,
capable.
so Jerry's confession is out there and it's in front of you. It involves, I'm afraid, the end of some turquoise locusts. Forgiven or not, 61054 on the text 61054. Start your message with Simon for the people's verdict. Forgiven or not forgiven? But we brought you Jerry's confession. Never mind the conkers. Here's the water pistol. It involved turquoise ink, prefect, locusts, and a hopeless teacher. Anyway, just checking in now, and here comes the people's verdict.
Yes, Gemma in St Ives says, forgiven only due to the strange response from the teacher. Why didn't he see this going on? And why did he just ignore turquoise locusts spreading across the room? Tony in Sevenoaks, forgiven. While I was at school, the ink in those inkwells went everywhere. It was frankly a disaster waiting to happen. I blame the ink, not the kids. But Gilbert says, not forgiven. I agree with Susie. As a teacher, I would have been fuming if this had happened to me. They should have focused on their learning and not playing around.
Used to flick the ink. That's one of the things that you could do.
With
if you had a
inkwell.
fountain pen.
Okay, I don't have a fountain pen.
No, well, that's what you... I'm just saying, back in the days.
Oh, back in the
what
day.
you missed.
Yes.
Anyway, we would like your confession because I think, let's be honest, you've certainly got a few. Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.